In the early morning hours of June 24th, 1983, a series of small decisions and chance encounters would converge to place young mother Tina Milford on a collision course with violence. What began as a routine overnight shift at a convenience store would end in tragedy, launching an investigation that continues to seek justice more than 4 decades later. Close to 3:00 a.m., retired Sheriff's Deputy Levis Smith Jr. pulled into the parking lot of the Lil Cricket convenience store, seeking a cup of coffee. The store sat directly beside the on-ramp of Interstate 85 North in Anderson, South Carolina, typically quiet at this late hour. Smith's vehicle was the only one in the parking lot aside from a lone station wagon, presumably belonging to the overnight employee. Upon entering the store, Smith found no one at the front counter ready to serve customers. Assuming the attendant had simply stepped into the back room, he called out, listening for any response from the storage area. When only eerie silence greeted him, Smith's law enforcement instincts began to activate. He quickly scanned the store, noting that the lights were on, the door remained unlocked, the register appeared secure, and there were no visible signs of struggle. Despite the apparently normal conditions, the unnerving silence prompted Smith to contact police. Deputies with the Anderson County Sheriff's Office arrived within minutes and conducted a thorough search of the store and surrounding area. They quickly confirmed Smith's observation that no cashier remained in the building. However, evidence clearly indicated someone had been working earlier that evening. Investigators discovered a pair of women's shoes, socks, a flannel shirt, and a pocketbook inside the store. While robbery seemed the most likely motive if foul play was involved, this theory was quickly dismissed. The cash register remained locked. The safe's top door was unlocked but closed and still contained over $2,000, and the abandoned pocketbook still held cash. The mystery deepened as officers tried to determine the whereabouts of the missing cashier. Law enforcement contacted Tammy, the second-shift clerk at the store, hoping she could provide insight into the situation. Whether investigators found identification in the purse or learned from Tammy, they soon identified their missing cashier as 23-year-old Tina Milford. Anderson County Sergeant Kendall Cash later documented Tammy's statement, which revealed she had stayed with Tina until approximately 1:10 a.m. No customers were in the store when Tammy left, though she had ensured enough money remained in the register for the next day's opening. When Tammy came to the store to help confirm the situation, she was somehow able to determine that approximately $78.82 was missing from the cash register. This amount seemed insufficient to serve as a motive for the apparent crime. During their search around the store, deputies noticed 2 significant items outside: a broom positioned in front of the building and a man sleeping nearby. The man, identified as Benjamin, was able to provide additional information about the hours leading up to Smith's arrival. While there was no mention in investigative reports that Benjamin had witnessed Tina using the broom outside, he confirmed that he had been sleeping and she could have been outside at some point without his knowledge. Benjamin reported seeing Tina inside the store around 1:30 a.m. when he had entered to purchase a drink. When he left, he observed 2 white men still inside the store engaged in conversation with her. Unfortunately, the investigative reports provided no additional descriptive details about these 2 individuals. Officers then contacted Tina's parents, Janie and Leon Hunter, to inform them that their adult daughter was not at work as expected. Investigators hoped the parents might offer insight, such as whether Tina might have simply left voluntarily, but they had no explanation for detectives. The Hunters knew unequivocally that their daughter would never have abandoned her post. Beyond the obvious evidence of her car, purse, and shoes remaining at the location, Tina's parents emphasized her responsible nature and her inability to afford losing the job. While working barefoot was not unusual for Tina, she certainly would have put her shoes back on if leaving on her own. Most significantly, Janie had spoken with Tina just hours earlier, and nothing in their conversation suggested any intention to leave. Janie told police that their phone conversation had been casual, likely just checking in with each other, until around 1:30 a.m., when Tina had to end the call because a customer approached. This information provided investigators with all they needed to conclude that Tina had been kidnapped, prompting them to issue a bulletin for a 23-year-old white female with long brown hair. The motive for the crime remained puzzling. While Tina was clearly the target, investigators wondered whether this was a crime of opportunity, with someone taking advantage of her vulnerable position alone during the early morning hours. This scenario would not have been unprecedented, as a similar incident had occurred earlier that same year at another location, where Tina had previously worked. Tina's older sister, Ann Hollingsworth, provided crucial background information about her sister's recent job changes. Ann had visited Tina at her previous workplace, the Little Cricket on 28th Bypass, and noticed her sister had a black eye. Tina explained that she had been robbed at that store and was being transferred to another location. The case files noted that following the robbery and assault, Tina had requested both a change of shift and location. Tina had moved to the Liberty Highway location on Interstate 85 approximately 1 week before her disappearance. While she continued working the overnight shift, her manager was actively seeking a replacement, so Tina could transfer to a shift where she felt safer. Significantly, on June 24th, Tina was not originally scheduled to work, but had volunteered to cover a co-worker's shift for extra income. This detail raised important questions about the crime's nature. If the perpetrator was not a random predator who happened to be in the right place at the right time, then it had to be someone familiar with Tina's circumstances, someone who knew she had moved stores and picked up the additional shift. This pool of potential suspects was relatively small. When reporters contacted Tina's longtime family friend Susan Hawley, she revealed that she had been unaware that Tina had even changed store locations, much less picked up an extra shift. Susan learned about Tina's disappearance when her husband's friend mentioned a missing girl from the Little Cricket. Initially, Susan felt relief, assuming it could not be Tina since she worked at a different location on Palmondary Road. Only that evening did she discover that the missing woman was indeed her friend. Tina would not remain missing for long. Around 11:30 a.m. on June 25th, dispatch received a call reporting a body discovered at the edge of woods off Frontage Road. The location was near the Highway 86 exit off Interstate 85, an area known as a lover's lane, approximately 14 miles from the store where Tina had been working. When investigators arrived at the scene, they immediately recognized this was the woman they had been searching for over the past 24 hours. Coroner Greg Shore, who has taken it upon himself to review Tina's files during his spare time since 2009, described the discovery. Tina was found lying on her back, wearing a t-shirt but no pants. The summer heat and sun exposure had already begun affecting the body's condition. Coroner Mackey responded to the scene, arriving at 2:55 p.m. after receiving the call at 2:20 p.m. He photographed the victim and worked with investigators to collect evidence and process the scene. They noted a gunshot wound to the head, and a .25 caliber cartridge case was found near her body. The bullet itself was later discovered still lodged in her brain. Tina remained dressed in the same distinctive Harley-Davidson t-shirt she had worn to work the night she was abducted. On her hand was a ring she was known to always wear. Approximately 30 to 40 feet away, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division investigators found her blue jeans, bra, and a used tampon that appeared to have been removed from her body. Subsequent autopsy results indicated no signs of sexual assault, though this did not necessarily rule out sexual assault or a sexual motive for the crime. This ambiguity became one of the persistent challenges investigators faced in determining motive. To identify the perpetrator, detectives needed to understand the reason behind the crime. Investigators began by tracking Tina's movements from the day before she was taken from her workplace, hoping to gain insight into potential motives. They learned that during the day on June 23rd, before beginning her work shift, Tina had purchased drugs from Jimmy Golden, a known dealer in Anderson. According to her friends, since meeting her husband Tony, Tina had begun associating with a rougher crowd and had become involved with drugs, at least intermittently. Coroner Shore noted that Jimmy Golden was connected to the local drug scene, and witnesses reported that Golden was holding Tony's motorcycle as collateral for a drug debt. Due to this financial conflict, several witnesses claimed Tina was actually purchasing methamphetamine for Tony rather than herself, since Tony would want to avoid direct contact with Golden. However, in Golden's statement to police, he claimed both Tina and Tony had arrived together to buy the drugs. Neither scenario made complete sense to investigators. If Golden's account was accurate, it seemed illogical for Tony to appear personally if he owed Golden money, as he would presumably be too frightened to show his face. More puzzling was why Tina would help Tony purchase drugs if they were engaged in a bitter divorce battle. Tina was married to Tony Milford, and at the time of her abduction, their relationship had deteriorated significantly. She had filed for divorce, and the final decree was scheduled to be granted the morning she disappeared. The timing seemed remarkably convenient for Tony. potentially allowing him to avoid the financial and custody consequences of the divorce. Through interviews with family and friends, officers learned that Tina and Tony shared an 18-month-old daughter named Crystal. By all accounts, Tina had been working diligently to save money to support her daughter as a soon-to-be single mother, which likely explained her decision to pick up the extra shift. Tina's best friend Susan revealed that she and Tina had grown apart since high school due to different social circles. But Susan remained close with Tina's family, the Hunters. Susan frequently visited because Mrs. Hunter watched her son while she worked. Susan recalled recognizing signs of abuse, noticing Tina with black eyes and bruises on her arms. Susan remembered one particular incident at Tina's mother's house when Tina wore dark sunglasses indoors. When questioned about this unusual behavior, Tina dismissed Susan's concerns. Susan understood that physical abuse rarely occurred in isolation and had heard disturbing rumors about Tina hiding under a car while pregnant to escape Tony's violence. Most shocking to Susan was later learning that Tony had burned Tina with cigarettes, something she had been unaware of at the time. There was at least one official report that may have documented Tina's abuse at Tony's hands, though it remains unclear whether investigators knew about this during the early stages of their investigation. No records indicate that any alleged abuse was ever reported to authorities. After their father's death in 2001, Anne discovered paperwork he had maintained regarding Tina's situation. Among these documents was a hospital bill totaling over $1,000, a substantial amount in the early 1980s. Tina's discharge date was listed as October 9, 1981, though the paperwork did not include details about her injuries or treatments. According to Anne, Tina's hospitalization resulted directly from a beating by Tony. When detectives interviewed Tony, however, he made no mention of marital problems or abuse. Instead, he claimed that he and Tina were still living together and working on reconciling their relationship. He acknowledged having contact with her on the morning before she left for work, but described it as merely discussing transportation and childcare arrangements. According to Tony's account, approximately 1 hour before Tina's shift was scheduled to begin, she called to report car trouble and concern about being late for work. He instructed her to take their daughter to his mother's house and borrow her mother-in-law's station wagon. This explanation accounted for the vehicle left in the store parking lot that night and revealed something investigators found particularly interesting. Tony was likely aware that Tina would be working overnight. This knowledge made Tony an obvious focus for investigators, though it was far from the only concerning factor. Tony's life was complicated by multiple stressors: the pending divorce, financial difficulties, and drug addiction. He quickly became the primary person investigators examined. When pressed for an alibi, Tony claimed he had been with his girlfriend Kelly at her residence. Despite maintaining that his marriage with Tina was improving, Tony was simultaneously involved with another woman. The reporting team obtained written evidence showing that Tina had discovered at least one of Tony's affairs before her death. In Tina's case, file was a letter she had written to Tony. While undated, the letter had to have been relatively recent, written within the last 18 months or so, because Tina referenced Tony being a father to their baby daughter. The letter revealed Tina's pain and anger upon discovering Tony's infidelity, expressing her shock that everyone seemed to know about his girlfriend except her. When investigators interviewed Kelly, she initially appeared to verify Tony's alibi for the early morning hours, when Tina was likely taken from the store. According to both Tony and Kelly, they had been at her residence. Between 4:00 and 4:30 a.m., Tony left to visit someone named Russell in Belton, approximately 20 minutes away. Kelly confirmed he returned sometime between 5:00 and 6:00 a.m., though there was no way to corroborate his whereabouts during the entire time period. In 1983, the standard method for testing credibility was the polygraph examination. Initially, Tony agreed to take a lie detector test, but changed his mind after consulting with an attorney. Kelly, however, proceeded with her polygraph, and the results, along with subsequent interviews with people who knew her, proved very revealing. Evidence emerged that Tony had lied about his timeline. Kelly failed the polygraph test regarding his time frame and admitted to other people that she had lied about the timing. According to these accounts, Tony did not return home at 5:00 or 6:00 a.m., but arrived earlier, covered in blood. The idea that Tony stood to lose everything at the final divorce hearing scheduled for the very day Tina disappeared was difficult to ignore. Susan recalled a particularly ominous conversation with Tina, probably within the last year before her death. While on Serene Street, Tina had told Susan, that if anything ever happened to her, Susan would know who was responsible. Susan understood exactly what Tina meant, recognizing that abusers rarely limit themselves to physical violence alone. Since Kelly refused to admit to police that she had seen Tony with blood on him, investigators began exploring a theory they considered more plausible, that Tony had not personally pulled the trigger, but had enlisted 2 other men to commit the murder. A witness, referred to as Dean, came forward with a story about encountering 2 men that night, who, in retrospect, he believed may have been connected to Tina's murder. Dean reported meeting 2 men in a station wagon at exit 27 who were looking for the little cricket store. When he learned about the abduction, he contacted the sheriff's department. While Dean remembered what at least one of the men looked like, he could not identify them. The theory of Tony employing accomplices raised questions about motivation, since Tony was financially destitute. This poverty was one reason detectives believed he was so concerned about the divorce hearing scheduled for the same day Tina disappeared, fearing the loss of their home and potential child support obligations if Tina received custody of Crystal. If this was not a paid murder-for-hire scheme, investigators wondered what leverage Tony might have possessed to convince someone to kill. While there was the known drug dealer Jimmy Golden, he and Tony appeared to be adversaries rather than allies, making it unlikely that Golden would assist Tony in any way. When detectives interviewed Jimmy, he claimed to be good friends with Tina. However, by the time they spoke with him, he could not provide an alibi and could not recall his whereabouts or activities that night. Even if someone else had pulled the trigger, investigators suspected Tony had some involvement in the crime. While they only had hearsay evidence, the accumulating witness statements painted Tony in an increasingly negative light. Someone told investigators that while Tina was missing, Tony and 2 companions were driving around searching for her when Tony suddenly stopped at a payphone, made a call, returned to the truck, announced they had found Tina, and drove directly to the scene. Coroner Shore noted that even years later, as a law enforcement officer in Anderson County, he would not know how to navigate directly to that location if given basic directions. For someone to drive straight there immediately after being told that his ex-wife had been murdered or found dead seemed beyond coincidental. Continuing to pressure Kelly seemed like the most promising approach to uncovering the truth about Tony's activities that night. Perhaps time or a relationship change would encourage her cooperation. However, just a few years after Tina's murder, questioning Kelly became impossible when she died, reportedly from an overdose. This death was part of a disturbing pattern. Multiple former girlfriends of Tony had died under questionable circumstances, all reportedly from overdoses or suicide. While investigators could not directly connect Tony to these deaths, the pattern seemed too remarkable to be coincidental. The case, filled with convenient coincidences, reached a standstill. While new detectives would occasionally review the files to provide fresh perspective, nothing substantial enough emerged to bring charges against Tony related to Tina's murder. In 2002, Tony was sentenced to 15 years in prison on an unrelated charge of trafficking crack cocaine, likely receiving such a lengthy sentence due to his existing criminal record that included simple assault and battery. The case would eventually receive renewed energy from an unexpected source outside of traditional law enforcement. In 2009, an impromptu partnership developed between Coroner Shore and retired police chief Martin Elrod, who had become a state constable. Their collaboration was sparked by the family reaching out to Shore and his subsequent chance encounter with Elrod. The pair began reviewing the case files and interviewing people listed in the original investigation. One particularly interesting associate of Tony's from Honeopath agreed to speak with them on July 29, 2009, about Tina Milford, though he insisted on anonymity due to concerns for his safety. This witness provided crucial information, stating that Tony Milford and Broadus Baldwin were involved in Tina's case. He reported that Broadus always carried a .25 caliber automatic gun with a white handle and chrome plating. After Tina's death, Broadus had allegedly traded this gun for drugs, and it was subsequently sold. While the final owner had since died, investigators attempted to locate the weapon through his widow, but she claimed not to have it. The witness revealed that Broadus had regularly visited his house before Tina's death to obtain money for drug purchases, sharing the substances with the witness. During this period, the witness was avoiding law enforcement and had money available, while Broadus worked as a brick mason. Significantly, Broaddus stopped these daily visits the day after Tina's death. When investigators interviewed Broaddus, they asked whether he believed Tony Milford would be capable of killing his wife. Broaddus confirmed that Tony was a very volatile person and acknowledged that Tony and Tina were divorced at the time. Broaddus claimed he had stopped associating with Tony because of his violent nature, stating he was not a violent person and would not be around such individuals. Another witness, Jed, provided additional incriminating information about Broaddus. According to Jed, a day or so after Tina went missing, he had gotten into the back seat of Broaddus's car when they were planning to go somewhere. In the floorboard, he discovered a picker stick, a tool used in textile mills. When Jed picked up the object, he noticed it had blood and long reddish-brown hair, similar to Tina's, attached to it. The significance of this discovery was compounded by the fact that this evidence was found in Broaddus's station wagon, presumably similar to the vehicle Dean had described encountering the night Tina disappeared. The one with two men searching for the little cricket store. While Tina had been shot, her autopsy had also revealed a crack in her skull, suggesting she could have been struck with a picker stick or a similar object. The scenario investigators envisioned involved Tina getting into the front seat of the car at the little cricket, with someone in the back seat striking her during the abduction, then driving up the interstate to exit at the next opportunity. Investigators wondered how the perpetrators would have known about the remote location where Tina's body was found. Research revealed that one of Tony's friends worked at a maintenance company on that frontage road, potentially making the area familiar to Tony and his associates. The .25 caliber gun that Broaddus was known to carry matched the caliber of the cartridge casing found near Tina's body. However, ballistics testing indicated it would not have matched the bullet retrieved from her brain. This discrepancy did not eliminate Broaddus as a suspect, since the theory involved two perpetrators, or Broaddus could have simply used a different weapon. Before it became public knowledge that Tina had been taken from her workplace, someone had allegedly observed Broaddus publicly announcing that Tina had been kidnapped. However, when confronted by detectives more than 25 years later, Broaddus denied all involvement. During the polygraph examination, Broaddus was asked three standard questions: whether he shot Tina Milford, whether he shot her with a .25 caliber weapon, and whether he was present at the scene. He answered no to all questions and did not exhibit indicators of deception. Once again, investigators faced the challenge of having only hearsay evidence without hard proof. They pushed forward, attempting to obtain the physical evidence they desperately needed. Armed with an affidavit detailing all the circumstantial evidence gathered over the years, a motion was filed requesting the court to compel Tony Milford, Jimmy Golden, and Broaddus Baldwin to submit DNA samples. The case of Tina Milford remains an active investigation more than 4 decades after her murder. Despite numerous theories, witness statements, and circumstantial evidence pointing to various suspects, law enforcement has yet to secure the definitive proof needed for prosecution. The investigation has been marked by convenient coincidences, suspicious deaths of potential witnesses, and a complex web of relationships within Anderson's drug community. Tina's family continues to seek justice for the young mother, whose life was cut short just as she was working to build independence and security for herself and her daughter. The case serves as a reminder of how domestic violence can escalate to its most tragic conclusion, and how the lifestyle surrounding drug addiction can complicate the pursuit of justice. While advances in forensic technology, particularly DNA analysis, offer hope for resolution, the case demonstrates the challenges investigators face when dealing with crimes embedded in communities where fear and loyalty often prevent witnesses from cooperating with law enforcement. Until new evidence emerges or someone comes forward with crucial information, the question of who killed Tina Milford remains unanswered, leaving her family and the community still waiting for justice.